Good afternoon, happy Sunday. Welcome to another Cook Along Live. Today we're going to be making a Japanese fried pork cutlet, also known as tonkatsu if you're of Japanese ancestry or descent, or if you just go to Japanese restaurants a lot. Basically, it's a really simple dish to make. If you haven't already started your rice, go ahead and get that on your cooker, or if you have a rice cooker or range or whatever, get that going. I'm using pork loin today. I like it because there's no bones. It's a lot of meat, not so much fat. I don't really like that kind of chewy texture that you get from fat. I'm more of a just give me the protein kind of guy. So that's what I'm using. You can use whatever cut of pork you want. Just make sure that you get it about an inch thick. You can make it a little thicker if you want. If you make it too thin, you're actually going to overcook it and kind of dry it out. So I don't recommend getting anything that's super, super thin. But pork loin works wonderfully. As far as things that you're going to need, you are going to need some kind of a deep bottom pan or a Dutch oven or something like that with about an inch to an inch and a half of oil in it. You want the oil to be just a little bit deeper than the thickness of your pork cuts. So go ahead and get that set up, and actually go ahead and start getting it heated. I'm lucky enough to have an induction cooktop. I can actually just kind of set the temperature and get it going. If you don't, just start heating it at kind of like a medium heat. You want it to start shimmering. If you look at the oil right now while it's cold, you're going to notice that it's kind of flat. It doesn't really have very much definition. It just kind of looks like a flat piece of oil. Let me go ahead and do this. See how it looks kind of like almost matte? Once it actually gets to the point where it's kind of hot and ready to cook, it's actually going to start shimmering. It's going to look really, really kind of ready to go. I'll come back to that once it's ready. We're going to start heating that up. If you haven't already seasoned your pork, gotten some salt on it or something like that, go ahead and take care of that now. And I hear the music coming back on, so let me switch that away from the music. There we go. I was like, what am I hearing? Am I going crazy? Anyway, go ahead and season your pork. So just get some salt, go ahead and put some seasoning on it. We're going to set it aside and let it kind of sit for just a sec. If you haven't seasoned your pork already, generally about an hour, maybe 2 hours ahead of time, give it a nice little dusting of salt and just set it in the fridge. Cover it if you want and let it kind of absorb the seasoning. This is the only chance you have to season the meat. Once we kind of bread it before we get it into the oil, you can't really season it after that. It's already kind of at the state that it's going to be in once we cook it. So go ahead and get it seasoned now if you haven't already. I did season it ahead of time, put it in the fridge. And I put that quick tip in the Instagram post that I made about what we were cooking tonight. So if you guys are interested in getting ingredients lists, some tips as to what to do to prepare before we actually start cooking, follow me on Instagram. I put all of my ingredients and everything every week up there. So season your pork. The next step that we're going to do is we're actually going to tenderize our pork. Now, you can get like a mallet that's got the tenderizing side on it. I've actually got one of those. We're not going to use it, but I've got one right here where you got like one of these little food mallets where the one side is kind of rough and it's basically made so that you can tenderize meat. The problem with these things is as you're tenderizing, you're also flattening. So you're going to take this nice thick pork chop that you got or pork loin that you have, and you're going to kind of flatten it while you're tenderizing it. Not ideal. Wouldn't recommend it. If it's all you got, go for it. If you don't have a meat tenderizer, mallet, or anything like that, you can use a rolling pin, but again, you're going to kind of flatten out the meat, which isn't really what we want in this kind of a dish. What I'm going to actually do is I'm going to take a fork, and with the fork, we're going to just go in and make a bunch of little holes through the pork cutlet like so. And what this does is it kind of breaks up the proteins of the pork and, in effect, tenderizes it. They also sell tenderizing like little things you can grab and do the same thing. But if you don't have one of those, there's no need to get one. A fork works just as well. And I've already seasoned these guys, so all I'm doing here is getting them tenderized. If you do this before seasoning, the seasoning will actually kind of absorb into the pork a little bit better. But it doesn't make that big of a difference if you didn't get a chance to do that this time. And as far as prepping our pork, before we get any of our coating on it, This is really all we got to do. Salt it ahead of time, season it ahead of time, and then just tenderize it however you're going to. And then just be careful you don't accidentally tenderize a finger, because that does not feel good. Not that I'm speaking from personal experience. Okay, yes I am. So, the next step that you want to do with your pork, we're going to set it kind of aside and let it kind of rest while we kind of get everything else going. If you've had a chance to let this rest for an hour to 2 hours, perfect. If not, do it next time. The seasoning on it right now will be plenty. What I like to do is you'll notice the one here on the left, I've already kind of trimmed off some of the more kind of tendony bits. It's just fat running through there, but it still gets a little bit chewy and not ideal. And then like this big piece of fat kind of on the end. Not really what I like in my tonkatsu. I like to just have the meat. So I'm going to go ahead and just trim the ends. You can do the same. You can leave it on if you like it. This does make the pork a little bit smaller as far as like the size of the cutlet. But then I don't have to deal with any of that while I'm eating my food. I can just focus on eating my food. And there we go. Set this knife off to the side for now. I'm going to move my pork up out of the way. And our next step is really to kind of get these guys breaded and ready for the oil. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to first put my panko over on this plate over here, and using a Ziploc bag to kind of keep this fresh if you've used it but not all of it is a great way to do it. I'm going to put about a cup of panko down in here. Put this back in the box. Next step, I'm going to grab a couple of eggs and just kind of beat them into a bowl with about a tablespoon to 2 tablespoons of water. So we'll get our eggs in there, a little bit of water. And really all that helps to do is kind of thin the eggs out. We don't want the egg, you don't want a full gloopy egg for your coating. Just want enough to kind of get the outside of the pork nice and wet so that everything sticks to it. And then once I get it all beaten up, I'm going to go ahead and pour it right onto this little plate that I got underneath it. And what we're doing is we're setting up a breading station. We've got our first station over there, which is where we're going to start pouring our flour onto our pork. We've got our kind of wet station here, where we're going to get the egg on the outside. And then we've got our panko station, which is the last place that our eggs are going to, where our pork is going to hit before it goes into the oil. And we got those two set up. Next step, we're actually going to just go ahead and grab our flour. And I like to just kind of spoon it right over the pork. I'm just going to grab a spoon. And we're just going to dust our pork with a little bit of flour. I don't like pouring a bunch onto the plate because you end up throwing a bunch of it away. This way you can kind of dust the pork with the flour. And then any excess falls down onto the plate, and you're more than welcome to, keep using it. But you don't use quite so much flour. And I'm going to use a little trick that I picked up, where if you don't want to get your hands all goopy with doing this breading station situation, just use a skewer. Grab a wooden skewer, or if you have a metal skewer. And all you have to do is kind of poke into your pork, and then just pick it up. We're just going to rub it around all over the flour. Just make sure that we coat the entire outside of the pork. On the rind, on the edges. And what this prevents is, generally speaking, when you're moving pork from like flour into egg into panko or something like that, one of your hands you designate as like your wet hand and one of them you designate as your dry hand. The problem is it never works. You're always going to get egg on the dry hand and flour on the wet hand, and it's just kind of a pain to manage it. Plus, you generally end up with like fingerprints on whatever you're kind of working with. This method here works a little bit nicer, in my opinion. I'm going to go ahead and just kind of dust the second one. And then we're just going to do one at a time into the egg. And actually, that's probably all the flour I'm going to need. So I'm just going to get that out of the way for now. We'll just get this nice and dusted. Cool. So I'm going to set this guy kind of up in the top here. We're going to work with this fine specimen right here first. What I'm going to do is just kind of pick it up. I know I said use the thing, but what I want to do is kind of dust off as much of the excess flour as I can. Just kind of by tapping on it. Now I'm going to put this right into the egg. And then just kind of move it around, make sure I get plenty of egg on. Now the reason that you add flour before you add egg is because if you add egg straight to the meat's surface is actually too slippery for the egg to adhere to. So by adding flour, you kind of create a coating. You create something that the egg can kind of stick to, and I don't want to say emulsify, but it almost turns into like a paste on the outside because obviously egg and flour are going to kind of thicken up. That's why you do the flour first, then the egg, and then back into the flour. We're actually going to do this 3 times. We're going to do egg, flour, or I'm sorry, flour, egg, flour, egg, flour, egg, and then panko. And what that does is ensures that we get a really nice, thick crust that stays nice and crispy on the outside of our pork. And so there's our second round of flour. I'm going to tap it off as best I can. Just make sure that I get much up here as I do. I dropped that skewer, so I'm going to grab another one. Hey, dog, go away. Skewer is not food. And we're just going to go back into our egg here. And all around the edges. And back into our flour. You'll notice that my hands are still clean. I'm not touching anything that's gloopy. So this is a great way to kind of keep your hands out of all of this mess that you're making. And again, we're just kind of adding a couple of layers of this initial kind of coating so that when it goes into the panko, or when it goes into the oil, everything kind of adheres to it really well. There we go. We'll just tap off some of the excess flour. Back into the egg, and then we're going to go into the panko with this one. Just make sure you have egg on the entire outside. You'll notice that the outside, the egg is getting super, super gloopy and thick, which is what you want. It's very, very sticky. It's very much like some of that paste that we used to use, like Elmer's glue back in college, elementary school. We're going to let the egg kind of drip off. Now we're just going to go straight into the panko. And you'll notice that the panko is going to adhere very, very well to this oiled is not the right word, but this very sticky, sticky piece of pork. We're going to go ahead and just get our panko on the outside. Give it a nice little flip. Just make sure we get panko on all sides of this pork. And again, you'll notice that with the skewer, we're not getting a bunch of gloop all over our hands. So we're kind of keeping everything nice and clean as far as ourselves is concerned. And by taking all the time to do all of this, our oil has heated back up. Or heated up, I should say, not heated back up. Let's switch over to here. And I don't know if you can notice in the camera, but the oil is kind of shimmering. Do you remember before how it was kind of matte? Now you can kind of see how the surface is doing like a little bit of a shimmery thing. That means the oil is generally hot enough to put whatever it is that you're cooking into. Again, you want to try to get it to about 350 degrees. That's a pretty ideal temp for this. I'm just going to kind of put a little bit of extra panko on here. Tap it on with my little skewer. Pick up the pork cutlet. Give it a nice little tap on the plate so that any loose bits fall off. And I'm going to gently lower it into the oil and lay it away from me. So here we go. And lay it away from me. Hey Siri, set a timer for 5 minutes. I'm just going to let that go. I'm going to check it in about, I guess, 3.5 to 4 minutes just to make sure that I'm not burning the bottom of it. But really, that's our pork cutlet cooking away. So I'm going to let that go. While that's going, I'm going to start working on number 2. Get it ready. It's generally best to cook these one at a time. Although if you can fit 2 into your pan, you can, but you want to kind of go straight from the panko into the oil, because the panko will start to kind of get wilty with all of that egg on the outside of the pork. So just kind of go as quickly as you can from the panko directly into the pan. And so we'll go ahead and get this guy started while number 1 cooks. And it's the same process. We're just going to do everything the exact same way that we did before. And I'll do that one. So we've got our layer of flour on the outside. We're just going to kind of roll this around in the egg. Make sure that we get all of the edges covered and coated. Back over into the flour. If you have any, if you need any extra flour, let's say you run out, maybe you're doing 4 or 5 of these, you can always add more. You're just not wasting, you know, a whole bunch of flour that you don't need to waste if you're not using it. Just make sure you coat the entire exterior. My poor dog every week thinks that he's getting some kind of super special treat while I'm doing these cook-alongs. And, you know, occasionally he gets little bits that fall off, or at the end, if it's something that's dog safe, I'll give him a little bit, but he's just so patient during the actual episodes, waiting right underneath my feet most of the show. There we are. Back into our egg. And that cutlet is browning nicely. Hey Siri, how much time is left on the timer? 2 minutes and 3 seconds. All right. Gonna add just a little bit more flour. Again, most of this is just going to kind of dust off, and then I can apply it to the other sides. Like so. Then I'm going to just kind of leave it sitting here on the flour until I'm ready to do my last run. Then I can put it straight into the oil. So, while we got a little bit of a break, I'm going to go ahead and crack open a beer. I'm drinking Elysian Super Fuzz. We've had some really awesome weather here in California lately. It's 85 outside right now, Fahrenheit. I believe that's 22 centigrade Celsius. Not 100% sure what that conversion is, but it's about 85. This is a nice hazy ale, I think. It's not really an IPA, but it tastes really, really delicious. How's your week been? You guys been having a good one? Any challenges? Any wins? I always like hearing about people's wins. That is a tasty beverage. Hey Siri, how much time is left on the timer? 28 seconds. My tonkatsu, my pork here, is looking pretty pretty nice and golden brown. So I'm actually going to go ahead and flip it like so. And that looks pretty perfect. And my timer should go off here in a second, and I'll just reset it for about 2 or 3 minutes. Hey, Siri, stop the timer. Hey, Siri, set a timer for 3 minutes. So we got our first pork cutlet almost done. Second one is ready to go. Go ahead and get a little bit more flour here on the top. And again, we're keeping our hands nice and clean because we're not touching any of the egg and not like directly touching the pork. So makes the process just a little bit neater. I'll go ahead and get this guy in the egg. I'll roll it around, make sure we get everything coated with egg so that our panko sticks to it nicely. And into the panko. Go ahead and just cover it. Nice little roll around. Hey Siri, how much time is left on the timer? Any little bald spots that kind of open up, we'll go ahead and cover back up. I'm just going to take a peek. Looking good. Now I'm done with my flour and I'm done with my eggs, so I'm actually going to just remove these plates. And I've got a nice little wire rack here. So we're going to drain our pork on the wire rack. What do I want? I want to use something to kind of prop up the pork so that I can put it up on an angle. That way the oil will drain off the sides and off the bottom instead of kind of pooling on top, if that makes sense. I'll just use my can, see if that works. Hey Siri, stop the timer. And there we go. Lovely looking tonkatsu. Pick it up. And what we'll do is we're going to put it right over here. We're going to stand it up on its side, up against something. Nope, doesn't even need it. It's just going to stand up. What this is going to do is allow the oil to kind of sheet off the sides and also kind of roll off the top, since the top is not flat. If we just laid it on its flat side, generally the top part of the cutlet is going to get a little bit more oil, just kind of residual on it. This will let it kind of clean itself off a lot nicer. And number two, we're going to go ahead and grab our second cutlet here. Give it one more turn for good measure. And then, again, right into the oil. Hey Siri, set a timer for 5 minutes. Now we're done with our panko, so I'll get that out of the way as well. Yikes. You stay up. And while we're waiting on that, you stay. While we're waiting on this guy here to kind of fry himself, we're going to get some of our sides ready for our tonkatsu platter. So I'm going to grab a clean knife, not the one that I used to trim my pork. I'm going to take a little bit of cucumber. I'm going to cut about 3 or 4 or 5 nice 1/8 of an inch little rounds. Was that 5? I'm actually going to go up to 7. Couple of 1/8 of an inch thick rounds. And what I'm going to do with these guys is actually give a little bit of salt. I'll just kind of set them out flat. And I'm just going to dust them just with a little bit of salt on top of them. Now you can pickle these if you have some rice wine vinegar, maybe a little bit of sugar, mix that up and toss the cucumbers into that, and you can kind of really quickly give them a pickle. I personally just like salt, so that's all I'm doing. I'm going to give them a flip, and then add just a little bit more salt to the backside. It just kind of seasons them. Make sure that they're not, just raw cucumber. Gives them a little bit of extra flavor. That's it. I'm going to go ahead and stack these guys, set them aside. The salt's actually going to draw out some of the moisture in the cucumber. And then it's also going to reabsorb that salt back in once it has had a chance to kind of do that. I'm also going to take a tomato and just cut it into quarters. And of course right now, still using store-bought, but hopefully here pretty soon my garden tomatoes will be ready. I'm just going to take the edge here, just the part that has the stem, and just kind of remove as little as I can to get that little stem piece off. I'm going to do that with 2 of my tomato quarters. And then very similarly to the cucumber, we're just going to kind of salt these just a bit. You don't want too much. You're just adding a little bit of seasoning, a little bit of flavor. And again, we're going to kind of set these off to the side. Now, last but certainly not least, traditionally, tonkatsu is served with a little kind of raw cabbage salad. So you're basically just shaving a cabbage into nice little strips and then serving it alongside your crispy pork. So grab a head of green cabbage. I've actually got mine already cut into a little quarter. That's what we're going to want. There's a couple of different ways you can do this. You can use a knife. Well, you should use a knife, I should say, to remove the root part, the stem. And you can 100% just use your knife to shred this like so. And just make sure that you're cutting very, very thin shreds of cabbage. Your other option, if you have one, and if you're comfortable using one, is, of course, to use a mandolin. And this tends to go a little faster and is definitely more consistent. And you just shred up your cabbage that way. And then the last little bit here I will manually chop so I don't lose a finger, because that's never fun. If you're using a mandolin, be very, very careful. And then what I'm going to do with the cabbage is, again, just add just a little bit of salt. You don't have to, and traditionally it's just served raw. But again, I like a little bit of extra flavor, so I'm going to add a little bit of salt to kind of season this. It'll also start pulling out a little bit of the bitterness in the cabbage. Hey Siri, stop the timer. Go ahead and give this guy the old flipperoo. And look at that. Beautiful. So this will actually start pulling out some of the moisture from the cabbage, and you can rinse it off before you serve it, and that just kind of gets rid of all of the bitterness, and you'll just be left with a nice, sweet, yummy cabbage. It's not salty at all if you rinse it. Kind of similar to the principle if you're making like a pineapple, and you cut off all the pineapple sides and then salt it. Pulls out all of the sweetness. It does not taste salty as long as you give it a good rinse. So add just a little bit more salt. A nice kind of gentle moving around. Let's grab a serving plate. So, get my mandolin out of the way. Get my wire rack out of the way. And I'm going to go ahead and start plating for this first tonkatsu that we made. If you guys can see that. First time putting the sink cam down here. Hope it's working well. And all I'm going to do is, I'm actually going to leave the salt in with my cabbage. But again, you can rinse it off if you want, if you don't want any salty. Just going to put the cabbage right kind of in the middle, offset just a little bit. So I've got it just a little bit kind of closer to me. I guess closer to the right side. We'll use about half of our cabbage here. Make a nice little pile. Then I'm going to take my 2 tomatoes that I've gotten seasoned and just kind of set them like so. My cucumbers, I'm going to kind of fan out over on that side. And now what I'm going to do is grab my tonkatsu that's been resting, move my plate out of the way. Grab this chunky boy. And then really what you want to do now is you really want to make sure that you kind of cut through this upper layer of crispy outside, the panko, and then just give it, if you can, one stroke in one direction all the way through. And that's how you cut through. And just give yourself some good, like 3/4 of an inch slices all the way through. Hey. And this knife needs to be sharpened. Let's see, let me grab this guy and see if it works any better. Not really, because I already started kind of tearing it apart. Although the breading is very tasty. There we go. Yep. There we go with that. And so what we're going to do is we're actually going to hide that little bit that came off by simply turning our tonkatsu around. All right. Grab our knife. We'll go right underneath this bad boy. Lift them up. And then let's do this. Move this a little bit over to the side like so. I can set that right down on the plate. And our tonkatsu is ready to serve. Now, the last thing that we're going to do, let me get this other pork out of the oil. And turn off the oil. And get this on the draining rack. That's going to bubble away until it cools off, so just let it go. Don't worry about it. Last step is ponzu sauce, or katsu sauce. I'm sorry, not ponzu sauce. You can make your own if you really want, but it's really, really hard to find anything that's any better than what you're already going to get from a store. And so I highly recommend you just grab katsu sauce from the store. It's actually not bad, based on Worcestershire sauce and some ketchup and a couple other things. But you can make your own. It tastes the same, so why go through all that trouble? The thing with this sauce is you don't want to pour it directly onto the chicken or the pork katsu, because you're actually going to cause the exterior to get, you know, kind of mushy because you're adding a lot of moisture with the sauce. I generally will kind of pour it right up along the front, like so. And what that'll do is let it kind of seep under just a little bit, but whoever's eating the dish can cut pieces up and dip them as they need to. You can also serve it in a completely separate dish on the side, and somebody can just dip into that. Either way. Now I've got some rice that's about 2 minutes away from being done, but I'm not going to make you guys wait for that. However, here is our delicious tonkatsu. And so this is one dish. Obviously, we have enough cucumber and tomato and cabbage to make a second plate, and we've already cooked our second little medallion here. And listen to how crispy these guys are. Let me grab a fork real quick. You guys can see into my madness. I don't know if you guys can hear this or not, but very, very crispy pork. And that's really what you want, a nice crispy pork tonkatsu. So everybody, that's what we got this week. I'm actually thinking next week of doing schnitzel, which is very similar to tonkatsu, but not quite the same. It's the German version of a very similar dish, usually pounded out quite a bit flatter and served with like a gravy on top of it. So that's what I'm thinking of for next week. So let me know what you think in the comments below. If you haven't already, go ahead and follow me on Instagram. Again, the ingredients for all of these are posted about a week in advance. This week I know I was running a little bit late. Sorry about that. All of the archives of these videos are available on YouTube, so go follow me on YouTube at Syrix, P-S-Y-R-I-X-X, and I'll see you guys on the next Cook Along Live. Have a wonderful Sunday evening, everybody. Good night.